over to Dallas and Ben, who are going to be talking about the enrolling your land into CRP.
Yeah, so my name is Dallas Glasik. I cover East Central Illinois, so essentially from Chicagoland down to Tuscola is my territory. And yeah, I'm going to kick it off, and then after that, I'm going to pass it to Ben Wilson, who covers the Bloomington and surrounding area. So he's Central Illinois, and I'm East Central Illinois. And on with us, we have Ashley Dawson, who covers the Effingham area, Jeremy Kunnick, who covers the southeastern Illinois, and then Preston Chapman, who covers a little more southwestern Illinois. So if you're within those areas, play calls out to name in the chat, and we'll be happy to connect with you. So starting off here, enrolling your land into CRP, that's where we're going. And a little bit about what Ben and I are going to be the ones doing the presentation here and chatting. This is what we're going to cover. So we're going to cover Farm Service Agency and important CRP information. Things to think about up front. We're going to cover general CRP and continuous CRP because they are two different programs within the same sign-up. But they have a lot of different criteria with them, and we'll explain that a little bit further in depth, and as well as contract and management, and then what to do next. So continue on, a little bit of history and back notes about CRP. So CRP, it's an abbreviation for Conservation Reserve Program that started since 1985. It helps soil, water, and wildlife. Overall, it saved 8 billion plus tons of soil and provides stable income for farmers in low profitable areas, and provides hunting opportunities to help rural economies across the globe. Or across the U.S. Little quote here from a local farmer here in the state of Illinois. With CRP and the Farm Bill, we are saving 1,730 metric tons of CO2 per year from that prairie pumping back into the soil. The equivalent to driving 2.5 million miles per year of a standard passenger car. And the CRP and cover crops we have appeared to attract deer and pheasants. So it is known across the state of Illinois to be a very valuable program and one of which that people thoroughly enjoy. One biggest question is kind of what it pays, and so I wanted to put this out as a very blatant statement. Payment rates under this current sign-up are based off of your top 3 soil types, not the CRP practice that is chosen. And us biologists are capable of helping you out and figure out that payment rate. But yeah, so CRP pays the same no matter what practice, unless you're in general or continuous. So the practice is not the continuing factor for payment rates. It is based on the soil. So going into this a little bit deeper and how to think about CRP opportunities, be similar as the background picture here. Along field edges are always a keen signed end rows, wet spots, etc. So, and we can turn situations like that into situations like this where you can enjoy a nice picnic during the summer and not have to fight the finances. Or as I'm from East Central Illinois, so we get a lot of this scenario where it's a nice flooded wet spot and you don't quite know where you're losing money on. So CRP and especially the precision ag model can tell you where where you're losing, and a CRP payment might be more financially viable for your pocketbook. Or if you're on along the Illinois River in the western part of the state, you'll end up with scenarios a little more familiar to this. This was actually taken in Knox County after the Illinois River flooded, or I guess that'd be the not the Illinois, that'd be the Spoon River. Once it flooded over and flooded out quite a bit of crop fields. Just a little glamour shot here. But yeah, so on average, this was a study published by Dr. Michael Swanson, a ag economist, and he said 20% of the farm loses money, 20% of the farm breaks even, and 60% of the farm turns a total profit. So that's kind of the ground that we're working on here is we're trying to look at that 20% that either loses money or breaks even, because CRP is, again, the Conservation Reserve Program, and what we like to say, farm the best, conserve the rest. So building off of that, we'll dive in. This is from Gary Schnittke, which is a U of I ag economist. He published this one here just in 2018. And just a little bit of mindset on the farming realm of how it's changed over the last 150 years. So this goes back to 1910 and ends in 2018. You can see on the left graph is net cash income for U.S. farms as the tall red line. The brown line there on the left is production expenses. And then the bottom is net return. And whenever you account for inflation, which is the right-hand graph, farmers in 2018 actually profited less than they did back in 1910. And we're kind of looking at that as some of the avenues is farmers now replacing natural services that were provided with synthetic services such as fertilizer and stuff like that. So you're spending a lot more money to farm ground that is not profiting the same as an acre that is actually bringing you in money. So this is where CRP can highly pinpoint that area. So we have here an example. Looking at this farm, you can see it highlighted out in yellow. And we're gonna highly focus in on that area with a red circle, because you can see when you start adding in yield maps and turning those profit loss maps, you can see that greatly turning year after year of just not competing with the rest of the field. And this particular farmer was having a hard time farming it. So this would be a prime example of something to look at for CRP, whether that be a general sign-up or continuous sign-up. So here's an example in my territory going into CRP. This is 160 acres and this is a profit loss map, not a yield map. And by throwing that 17 acres in to CRP, actually increased his profit by $6,400 a year. He came in initially asking about tile, and I ran a cost analysis for tile and showed a profit of $19,200 to $32,000. And within that time frame, that tile would pay off. So CRP pays right out of the gate. So the big question you got to ask yourself as a landowner or a farmer is, what are your farm goals? Are your goals money? Are they conservation recreation? Are they farm legacy? All that has to go into it and will determine the sign up that you sign. So This CRP sign up and or other conservation programs can help you meet those goals, and us biologists are definitely here to help assist you however we can. So a little bit of a shout out things you need to think about is what you have, what is simple versus what you're interested in doing, whether you're wanting to do complexity of CRP or simplicity, and that's between the split between going towards a wetland or towards a pollinator. And then the biggest question, and why we have this in caps here, is where do you want and where do you want to do and what do you want to do? So building off that, we're going to dive into this this year's two different CRP programs. There's general CRP and continuous CRP. My fellow biologist Ben Wilson is going to be talking about the continuous CRP. I'm going to dive into general. General CRP is a little more older program and could be familiar with some, but not all. So the big takeaways from general CRP is that it's a little more of a ranking process. I like to consider it as a bidding process, and they use what they call an EBI ranking tool. So that's an environmental benefits ranking tool. And that's where I kind of like to say that it comes with the bidding mindset is you have to say what you can do, what you're willing to do, and how much you're willing to pay for it is the general CRP. Continuous is a lot of different programs, so we'll touch about that later. But continue on. So this sign up runs, until February 28th. Contracts will start on October 1st, similar to continuous sign up, and as well, it will have the same year of commitment of a 10, 15, and they're in the works of a 30-year contract, but I have not seen anything in the paperwork worth that, unless one of the other biologists can talk about that further in the chat. So with general CRP, you are looking at the Environmental Benefits Index. That is your bidding system, and there are multiple factors that go in that. The biggest of which are what they have referred to as N factors. So you have 1, the wildlife factor, 4, the enduring benefits. So that's how long it will be within a practice. 5, air quality benefits, and 6, cost. So everything else within these general CRP sign up will fit into these factors and add towards that score. So starting off with N1, that is the wildlife factor. So there's 3 categories that go into the wildlife factor. And as you see there, they are clearly listed as 1A, 1B, and 1C. So you have habitat cover, wildlife enhancement, and then wildlife priority zone. So you will get particular points based off your location being the biggest. And I have there on the right hand side of the image, there's a map. Those are the listed priority zones. So if you are in one of those zones, definitely consider some general CRP sign up. And then you can add more points by doing enhancement and changing your wildlife cover. So diving into the wildlife cover here, there's different practices, and they all had different points because of the wildlife benefit that they will provide. So introduce grasses, that would be more your brome, fescue, bluegrass kind of old-fashioned CRP that we've seen. Native grasses would be a little more aligned with some of your tall grass prairies, and you get 20 or 50 points out of that compared to the 10 or 40 before. But if you're willing to grow here in the state of Illinois a little more oak savanna or hickory savanna, hardwood planting, you could definitely gain more points on top of that. So these are all things that you need to consider talking with your local USDA office. Diving in a little bit more is going into the permanent wildlife and corridors, or permanent wildlife habitat. Pollinator is a big one across the state right now. So there is both general and continuous pollinator habitat, and in continuous, it has 50 points right out of the gate of having pollinator because of the benefits that it can provide. Safe is that is a local area eligible program, and so that's only eligible for parts of counties, and that'll be on a similar level as pollinator, but it is focused on rare and declining habitats. So diving in a little bit on wildlife enhancement, and this is be kind of more along the lines of improving existing general CRP. If you're wanting to re-enroll it, this would be a similar way to do it, and how to gain points to increase your score and increase your chances to re-enroll. So you can increase your chances by adding pollinator habitat or adding safe acres if you are within their designed area, or you can get 5 points just for adding wildlife food plot. So the food plot is definitely one that you should consider, that is quite easy to add in. So looking at pollinator habitat and safe, this is by far our most promoted, because it is the far best points for wildlife value. If you want pheasants, if you want quail, if they're naturally in your area, if you add pollinator habitat, chances are you're going to get those game birds, or even deer and turkeys, for that matter, because a lot of the chicks focus on insects as their primary diet. So if you build habitat for insects, you're going to get habitat for good game species. And you can get up to 50 points for having whole field pollinator habitat on your general CRP. And there's a little clause we have listed here. Pollinator is available in continuous, but it is areas less than 10% of the farm or less than 10 acres, whichever is smaller. That is a 2019 or 2020 rule that they came about. So that is a recent rule that has changed from previous conversations. So wildlife food plots is a question we get quite a bit. And yeah, you can add 5 points to your general CRP score if you're wanting to add in food plots to it. So if you're sitting there on a standard CRP of brome grass and something on a hilltop that was listed in general, well, you can get an extra 5 points and ensure your re-enrollment if you add a limited to 10% or 5 acres of field towards a wildlife food plot. So easy things to be done, especially on general CRP where you're interested in hunting those acreages. You can add these and hunt over them and enjoy them and collect points all the while. So diving into enduring benefits here. So enduring benefits kind of ties into how long the wildlife habitat's going to be there. So the N4 factor is an evaluation of likelihood for certain practices to remain in place beyond the CRP contract. So this really ties into those farming areas, and especially targeting low profitability areas. And if you're interested in a tree practice, something that's going to take more than the contract period of 10 to 15 years. Especially with trees, if you're looking at trees, definitely you will score high on this enduring benefits factor, because it will take more than 15 years for those trees to probably become recognizable for what the trees they are. So that this is definitely one to consider if you're looking at those tree practices or wetland practices, or lock in some longevity if you're a landowner wanting to more retire out and look at either the kids or the grandkids. This would be a way you can score high on. As well, they look at carbon sequestration. So we have here a list of the highest ranking carbon sequestration. This falls very along the lines of the last one, the N4 category of longevity. Of course, because your tree practices will sequester more carbon than your ordinary grass practices. And you see the CP42, that's your pollinator, that's the second ranking. So whenever you focus in on natives and trees, you will sequester more carbon than looking at just and introduced grasses or food plots. So that is a way you can add more points if you're wanting to go towards your primary grasses or primary trees. And here's kind of one. This is the big kicker with general CRP is the N6 number. So this is cost. And this is really where it comes down to bidding, because with general CRP versus the continuous CRP, you actually, as a landowner, get to rank in how much you are wanting to be paid for those acres. And of course, the lower the number you go, the higher the points you get. So the more likely you're going to be within ranking for CRP here. And yeah, so just looking at this here, you have the cost, which is determined after the end of sign-up, offers a lower per acre rental rate, may increase chances of being accepted. As well, a reduced payment offer based percent below the maximum payment rate offers 1 to 15%. So for a 15% reduction, you will receive 25 extra points. So with general CRP, again, it's a bidding process. So the more points you're willing to give, the more likelihood you are willing to receive the CRP. And that's where I really want to toss the precision ag conservation model that Pheasants Forever has developed. Of turning this into a profit loss maps can greatly help with general CRP bidding process, because you do get a lot of points based there off the bidding. And this here is a example of Dr. Gary Schnetke from the University of Illinois. He's an ag economist, and he posted his 2021 projections for high productivity farmland. And between Champaign and Decatur, it is expected to be a profit of negative $75 an acre and negative $27 an acre for soybeans within this high productivity farmland with cash rent and high expenses for that. So this is definitely one where general CRP would benefit farmers if to run through a precision ag model, because you can bid lower if you know you're not grossing a profit off those particular acres. So you can toss in $100 an acre or $80 an acre and still be, if you toss in $170 an acre for CRP payment on based off corn profit, you could be $175 an acre profit on your operation. So I do want to tag this in there because that definitely is a scenario you want to think about when it comes to general CRP. So a little bit of my thoughts about general CRP is to keep it simple when applying, and if you're willing to do the work, go for the higher quality cover types. So if you see an avenue you want to hunt pheasants, do a pollinator, because you're going to get pheasants that way. You're going to get quail that way. So if you're wanting to build a habitat that you want, go for the work and build the points. It's higher points wins the system about general CRP. So if you want to do less work but are still willing to do some work, go for an enhancement. So that'd be like your food plot. So if you want to have continue enrolling your brome grass seeding, but you want to change it up a little bit, add a little more points, secure your spot for CRP, add an enhancement like a food plot, or add a pollinator seeding, make it a little more wildlife beneficial, and you'll get higher points. That'll put you up on that ranking. And I got a couple of examples here. So here's an example of doing the work and going for higher quality cover types. So this example that is a brome grass stand, and that would give you 10 points. But if you were just to do a simple diverse mix into this, so if you were to spray it down, kill off the brome, disc it up a little bit, do a prescribed burn, add in some native examples, you're going to get up to 50 points. So that can greatly increase your scoring and the rate that you re-enroll, or the rate that you enroll into. If it's a brand new enrollment, you can get quite a bit more just by adding higher diverse wildlife planted mix. So a pollinator seeding, a native seeding would do a lot more than typical brome and alfalfa. That was the typical general CRP whenever that first started to come around. And as well here, just by doing management on your brome and alfalfa stands, such as spraying, burning, disking, respraying, interseeding, stuff like that are going to score you up by doing those enhancements. A little bit of cost here. So CP2, which is a native grass stand, is going to cost you about $110 per acre. Roughly, depending on seed sources you have or equipment that you use, and that's going to bring in, or comparative to, so that'd bring in your 10 points. If you were to do a pollinator, the CP42, that's going to run about $175 an acre, but you can get an extra 50 points between those. So or 40 points between them. You get 10 on one side, 50 on the other. So that's definitely one thing to consider, is you can get a lot more points just by adding the wildlife benefits and diversity and building up for a more wildlife friendly habitat. So I'm going to back again. So going back to the standard brome stand, so you get 10 points for this. We're repeating this because this is what a lot of general CRP people are re-enrolling are probably in this belt, where it was seeded as a continuous grass stand of brome or fescue even here across the state of Illinois. But you can get an easy 5 more points just by adding a food plot. So That'd be going in there, spraying down the brome, dissing it up, adding a wildlife-friendly food plot for less than 10% of the acreage, and you get an extra 5 points just from there. So there's a lot of easy things that can be done to increase your point rating for general CRP, and that's the big takeaway with general CRP is you're looking for points. The more points, the more likely you are to re-enroll, and the more likely you are to be accepted. So going in here, and Ben Wilson will talk about continuous CRP, and yeah, no CRP is exactly the silver bullet because all does require management, and all does require work, but it can really be a win-win-win in the end whenever you compare it to conventional farming prices and the way the ag economy is currently going. And the big thing is, yeah, you have to have a good idea of what you want to do before coming into the office. If you go straight into the office, chances are you're going to be tossed around. But if you have an idea when you walk into the office, you will be able to walk out with a good piece of information and a good pathway for what you want to do. And from here, I am going to stop share my screen, and I'll pass it over to our biologist, Mr. Ben Wilson in Central Illinois.
Thanks, Dallas. So, there we go. So yeah, like Dallas said, my name's Ben Wilson. I'm out of Bloomington, Illinois, but I cover the surrounding counties in this area. And so tonight I'll be talking about the continuous CRP sign up, which is a little different than general. Your payments are more than likely going to be a little higher. However, there's going to be a lot more rules and regulations that will limit the amount of acres that you can put in. Whereas general, you're more than likely going to be able to put in those large acres. Continuous CRP is really helpful for targeting the corners, edges, or just parts of fields that aren't really great and aren't bringing high yields. So we'll dig into that a little more. So continuous practices are available to specifically address soil, water, and wildlife resources. The sign up is continuously going on. So whereas the general sign up stops on February 4th or February 12th this year, this one will continue on until the end of the federal fiscal year, September 30th. And a lot of these continuous CRP practices offer incentive payments, like a sign-up incentive and a practice incentive payment, where general sign-up would not. And contracts typically are 10 or 15 years long, with some being, there are some practices that they're trying to do 30 years, like waterways and filter strips, I believe. So just an example of some of the continuous CRP practices that you can come across. These are just a few. There are some more. Shallow water areas for wildlife, filter strips, wetland restorations for non-floodplain as well as within the floodplain, habitat buffers for upland birds, or field borders, as some of you might have heard them called. The pollinator habitat, which Dallas talked a lot about, and prairie strips. And like I said, there are others available, and I'll go through these here right now. So a CP9, or a shallow water area for wildlife, it has to be less than 10 acres in size, and you're allowed to have a 20 to 120 foot grass buffer around this wetland area, and with an average water depth of 6 to 18 inches. So you really want to have this to be a shallow wetland, just because that's going to provide really high benefits for not only ducks and shorebirds, but you're going to see that your deer, your turkey, pheasants, quail, pretty much any upland game is going to really take advantage of having these shallow water areas as well. And these usually do require engineered dirt work, and the engineering is done by NRCS, but the dirt work will be done by you or whoever you hire out. For a CP21 filter strip, this is a very common practice, at least where I'm working. You can have it be 50 to 120 feet wide, and this is really to improve areas along ditches, creeks, and rivers. This really helps retain the soil and improve water quality. And so here's just an example of an area that really could use a filter strip. You can see here where you're just losing a lot of soil, and as your crops just aren't doing real well in that area. And so adding in those filter strips here is really going to help not only just that area, but the rest of your farm as well. And so if you use a diverse filter strip mix with a lot of natives in it, you can have a really nice area on your farm as well. That's going to be really just aesthetically nice. With a CP23A, this is non-floodplain, so this is outside the 100-year floodplain. Your area must have hydric soils, which just means that they hold water well. And so the biologist can determine that for you. We can run a simple analysis in one of our programs, and we can figure out what your soils are and whether or not you would qualify for this program. And so this is really great for upland areas that have some wetland areas within them, some potholes and such. And so for this one, you can have a buffer of the grass area of up to 4-to-1 ratio from your wetland to buffers. And so you can make this as complex or as simple as you like. There's a lot of wiggle room on what work is done on these wetlands. You can do it as simply as planting natives in your wet areas and breaking tile and letting that natural flow of water sort of return to the area, or it can be as complex as putting in berms and structures to really hold water back to flood up several acres. And it's noted here that food plots are allowed in this practice, which is a great opportunity, like Dallas was saying, to have some high quality habitat for wildlife on these. So here's just an example of an area where you can see there's a lot of wetlands on that field and with the buffer, and it's just going to be able to take out this wet spot here in the upper right corner and create a wetland with a buffer around it to square off the field, which is just makes things easier farming wise, and you don't have to worry about the wet spot in the corner of the field. With a CP23, this is a wetland restoration that's within the 100-year floodplain. So these are going to be targeted near streams and rivers that flood fairly often. So like I said, the site must be within the 100-year floodplain. Again, you can make this as complex or as simple as possible. There are a few more hoops to jump through with permits and things if you're going to be building berms within the 100-year floodplain, but your NRCS office can help you and get you details on that as you need them. Again, in this practice, food plots are allowed as well. So you can have a great wetland and a food plot sitting right next to the wetland, and it's going to make some really good habitat for wildlife and hunting opportunities for yourself. So here's just some more pictures and other examples of this area that's getting flooded out by the river that is nearby, and you can see that they've put in a buffer and this wetland, and so they're able to square off that field and not have to worry about farming that low area that's causing issues. CP33s, habitat buffers for upland birds, or some people call them field borders. So these are really great to go on the edges of your fields. They do have to go around the entire field. Now, they used to not have to, but now they've changed the rules, I believe, about 2018 or 19 to where they have to go all the way around. They can be anywhere from 30 to 120 feet wide, and the widths can fluctuate in different areas so that we can match up to your planters. The CP33s can include pivot corners. I know a lot of farmers down in Tazewell County are using them in their pivot corners, and it seems to be working really well for them. Fields must be at least 5 acres in size if you're not doing pivot corners for a field border to go into the field, because otherwise they want you to still have some crop in the center of this CP33. If you don't have the crop in the center, they're not going to let you enroll it in this. And the approximate seed cost for the different plants that would be in a CP33 is roughly about $85 per acre. Now that's your average seed cost. If you want to go more diverse and have better habitat, it's going to cost you a little bit more, but it'll probably pay off for you in the long run. And so here's just an example you can see in these where your pivot corners are getting turned into some field borders. And so here is something that Dallas talked about with looking at yield maps and trying to figure out what best to do on these areas where you're not getting your high yields, you're next to trees, and it's just really hard to get a stable crop out of these. Well, putting in a field border around those is really going to help you out. It's really going to provide habitat as well for upland birds and people who have said that they hardly see quail or pheasants anymore, who are putting these in. They're seeing more pheasants, they're seeing more quail. The real concern for these species is habitat loss. So by providing habitat, by putting in CP33s or other types of CRP is really the best option if you want to see more game birds and other wildlife. So CP42, like Dallas said, this one has been a really big one for Illinois in the past several signups. For continuous CRP, you have to have at least half an acre minimum to go in, and then it can't be more than 10 acres or 10% of the farm, whichever is smaller. So your 10-acre is the max acres you can have on your farm. But you can mix and match different practices with this, so you don't have to just stick with just one practice. And the approximate seed cost for a pollinator is $135 to $165 per acre. And so this will, obviously the higher end is going to be your more diverse plantings, but they're going to include a lot more flowers, and it's going to really benefit your pollinators and other wildlife. And it's a great practice to put next to your crop fields because it's going to attract these pollinators that may help pollinate your crop as well. CP43 prairie strips. So this is a newer practice. They're still kind of working out all the details, but they've really kind of gotten a lot of stuff nailed down. It can be 30 feet to 120 feet wide, and it can't take up more than 25% of your cropland area. And so with these practices, you can run them adjacent to waterways. You can run them like an incomplete field border, so just on two sides of the field, one side, three sides, you name it. It can also be run strips through the field as long as they're a certain distance apart. And so there's a lot of flexibility with this one. And the main goals of a CP43 are soil erosion and to provide wildlife habitat. So they're really promoting this one this year with being able to do all of those things and have the flexibility with putting it in only certain areas of your field. So, well, I'm sorry that you can't see part of the text, but there was a study done at Iowa State University. That's where they really started looking into these prairie strips as a CRP practice. And so really what they found was that by putting these in, a lot of the nutrients and fertilizers that are in the soil, you're not losing as much as you normally would without these CP43 prairie strips in place. And you can see that higher yields if you're using them correctly in certain areas by taking out your low yield areas, as well as using them through the field to provide better water quality and hold those nutrients in the soil. And so here's just an example of, you've got your soil caught in a strip here through the field. Well, you can put a prairie strip through and you can get sometimes 5 to 20% yield increase just from putting in this prairie strip and taking out those undesirable acres.
Ben, do you care if I interrupt there quite on those two pictures?
Yeah, let me go back.
Yeah, so I took those two pictures personally here in East Central Illinois, and especially those in more hilly slopes. We were in very flat soil, and I took a tape measure and calculated 8 inches of collected soil just off of establishing prairie strips instead of doing terracing. So they are, if you want to keep your soil on your farm, that is by far one of the best ways to do. The root systems and the tall grass structure keeps it there. And as well, yeah, there's a 5 to 20% yield increase on soybeans by bringing in pollination when you have 10% of your field thrown into native prairie strips. So that it's really exciting to see these practices come about because this is the newest. Of Illinois. And I'll let Ben continue.
All right, thanks, Dallas. So, like I've said before, continuous CRP is great for odd areas of the field and partial field enrollment. So, a lot of great ideas would be places that are difficult to access, where you're overlapping rows, like I've said before, where you're having less productive crop yields, as well as just where you might have deer damage. So here's an example of a field that's got a lot of interesting fingers in it that are probably difficult to get in, turn around, and farm in general. So why not go ahead and just take those out and put them into CRP? It kind of squares off your field a little bit, makes it easier to farm, and you're probably going to be making a little more from your CRP payments than you would from your yield of your crops in there anyway. And it's going to just provide a lot better habitat for wildlife as well. So squaring up the fields, that's a great way to reduce fuel consumption. It creates less wear and tear on your equipment. Usually you're going to spend less time in the field and you're going to have to make fewer turns, which is always nice. And so again, this field, it's pretty squared to start, but you can always do it even better and really square it off by taking off those corners and that side. Typically for this, I would recommend something like a CP43 prairie strip, because you're able to take that side and run a prairie strip with varying widths around. As long as it's less than 120 feet, you're good. And as well, you can mix and match with certain practices to take up more acres. And so for mid-contract management, most CRP practices require management activities as part of their approved conservation plan. This is something that's brand new, to where not all practices require mid-contract management anymore, but most of them still do. And the mid-contract management is completed usually in years 4 through 6 of a 10-year contract, and I believe it's 4 through 9 of a 15-year contract. And so you must manage portions at a time with activities pre-approved by FSA and NRCS. So what that means is that if your field is 5 acres or less, it'll be split over 2 years. And if it's greater than 5 acres, that management activity will be split over 3 years. And pre-approved activities include prescribed fire, which is by far the best for these native habitats. They're going to really benefit from having fire on the landscape again. You can do things as prescribed disking, you can do strip disking, strip spraying, and a new one this year, you can do prescribed grazing. However, there are quite a few limitations to what practices and how you can go about doing that as well. But if you have questions, reach out to one of our biologists or your NRCS office. They should be able to help you figure that out. However, there is no cost share anymore with these mid-contract managements. There used to be some cost share in older contracts, but I believe last year or 2 years ago, they removed that from the contracts. And so what should you do now? Well, after hearing all this information from Dallas and myself, I would go and just think about your options and decide whether or not this is something you want to pursue. And if you have any questions, please contact a biologist. It's what we're here for. We love helping people like yourself get projects and habitat on the ground. And we can help you navigate the sometimes muddy waters with FSA. So please give us a call. And when you do reach out to FSA, make sure that you've got your deed, a map, and your objectives along with your initial plan in mind. Because if, like Dallas said, if you go into an FSA office with a plan and a map drawn on with how you want things done, then it's going to be a lot easier for yourself and the FSA CRP clerk to get what you want done. And so, like I said, remember, we're here to help. It's our job to help get this stuff done. So please give us a call. So with that, I know we've been taking a lot of questions in the chat. Katie, I don't know, are we going to take some questions live as well?
Yeah, so before we do that, so if you still have questions, we have them popping up on the chat panel and in the question and answers. If you are interested in learning more and speaking to our biologists, we have quite a few of them on tonight. And I was going to show you, if you're looking for contact information, where you can find that. There's 2 places. Are you guys able to see my screen right now?
I stopped sharing, so there, you might be able to. Sorry.
Take control. No problem at all. Actually, it might not let me because I'm recording. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.